Wondering why your calorie deficit plan isn't helping you lose fat? I'm going to debunk the most common myths about calorie deficits for weight loss that are probably holding you back from getting the fat loss results you want. I talk a lot about fat loss on this channel, so if that's your jam, please subscribe. You need to count calories to do a calorie deficit. No, you don't. Calorie deficit just refers to the actual process of fat loss that occurs when you burn off more calories than you take in. Tracking calories can be an effective way of estimating your calorie intake, especially if you eat at home and are able to weigh and measure your food. But there are ways of naturally reducing your calorie intake so that getting into a calorie deficit is easier. Eating more low-calorie density foods like fruits and vegetables helps fill you up with fewer calories. A calorie deficit also refers to both calories in, which I just talked about, and calories out, how much energy you're expending. So you can exercise more, doing more weights, doing more cardio, or you can try to walk more. And you can also just move around a little bit more, taking more breaks during your day to move around, or try to do some activity standing that you might normally do seated. But remember that adding more calorie burn isn't as efficient as reducing your calorie intake. You don't burn off as many calories as you think with exercise. Burning off a donut, for instance, which is approximately 200 calories depending on the size and type. If you weigh, let's say 160 pounds, you might need to swim or do some brisk walking for 30 minutes to burn that off. So if fat loss is your goal, focus on what you're eating first, especially if you're already generally active and exercising. You can be in a calorie deficit and not lose fat. I constantly get comments on my videos about calorie deficits where people say something like, "I've been doing a calorie deficit for years and I haven't lost a single pound." That's only a slight exaggeration. If nothing changed in your body, then you have been eating at maintenance. People get confused because they'll do an equation that they see on an online calculator, but it isn't really accurate for them. And so they're eating the number of calories that that equation has told them is a calorie deficit, but it actually isn't. It's an estimate and it's wrong for them. Therefore, they have to choose a different number. You're at maintenance. Whatever that number is that you think you're eating, you need to eat a bit less, or you need to increase your energy expenditure. That will get you into a calorie deficit. The other possibility is that you're not tracking calories accurately. If you're eating out a lot or you're doing takeaways or something like that, it becomes a lot harder. If you're not tracking and monitoring everything, it's not going to be as accurate. And some people just seem to forget certain meals or certain snacks they have and they don't include it, or they're only tracking when things are exactly the way they wanted to eat it. But then if they ended up having twice as many fries, they just forget to record it. So there are a lot of ways where calorie counting can go astray. I'm not saying it's not useful, but you have to be accurate in order for it to be useful for you. Now, I haven't tracked calories for a long time, not since my last fitness competition. And I'll just go through periods where I might be eating a little less because I'm having fewer processed foods, I'm not drinking any alcohol, and all of a sudden there will be a change in the scale and my weight will go down. And I'll look at that and go, I was in a calorie deficit because I lost weight. So it's kind of looking at it a different way. If you're not seeing any changes, you're not in a deficit. Of course, there are a lot of reasons why your weight could vary. If you're increasing your muscle mass and you notice that you've got more muscle, but you are leaner overall, then maybe you've done some body recomposition. Muscle is slightly more dense than fat, so if you're more muscular and you lose some fat, then the weight could be about the same. But that's probably not what most people are referring to where they say they haven't lost any weight or they haven't seen any changes in their body. If you see changes in your body, more muscle, feeling leaner, but the numbers haven't changed on the scale, that's fine. Who cares what you weigh if you look the way you want to be looking? Starvation mode. This myth is one of the most common, and for me it falls into the category of excuses people use when they aren't getting any results. Starvation mode really refers to actual starvation, when people have extremely low calories for an extended period of time. Eating disorders are also an area where that could be a factor. So for sure, that will reduce your metabolism down to a level that's going to make it really easy to put on fat. But for the average person dieting, even if you've been dieting for months, it's not starvation mode that's keeping you from getting leaner. The Minnesota Starvation Experiment showed us a little bit about what happens when people eat low levels of calories for an extended period of time. This experiment took place for 6 months. It was a group of men, conscientious objectors to the war. They were put into this experiment where they started off eating 3,200 calories a day. Then their calories were 1,560. Now, a lot of you are probably saying, that would not be semi-starvation for me, that would be a normal day. It doesn't seem like that low, but this was accurately tracked and monitored. I don't want to share any of the photos from this experiment because they're a bit terrifying, but needless to say, they were emaciated and not looking very well at the end of this. Eventually, they took them off this and then allowed them to eat freely, and all sorts of problems resulted from this. They had a hard time knowing when to stop eating. They constantly felt like they weren't satisfied by the food. Some of them experienced an overwhelming desire to eat, and they were binge eating. Because of this, a lot of the participants gained weight very fast. They exceeded their weight at the starting point of the study. They had all sorts of mood issues, irritability. They felt horrible, basically. To everyone's relief, after a few months of normal eating, most of them stabilized with their mood and behavior, but not everyone felt like they were back to normal with their eating habits. So overall, it took the men about 2 months to 2 years to recover from this experiment, physically and emotionally. Now, this study would never pass an ethics committee these days, but it's been used to talk about metabolism and the effects of extended restriction of calories. It tells us a lot about the mental implications of long-term dieting. Another interesting point about this study is that they were eating almost entirely carbs. The idea was to study the wartime food restrictions, so they were using foods that were available during that time: potatoes, rutabagas, turnips, bread, and macaroni. So almost exclusively carbs, which also probably tells you what you need to know about whether carbs are going to impede your fat loss. No, they're certainly not. If you're eating a lower amount of calories, you are going to lose weight. So starvation mode does exist, but it's not going to happen to the average person. Your metabolism is not going to slow down to the point where you're going to burn off so few calories that you'll always be putting on fat. The research on weight loss plateaus seems to indicate that the reason that people stop losing weight is that usually when people go through periods of dieting, they diet and then they binge, or they just have a bit more. The developed models support the hypothesis that an intermittent lack of adherence can lead to an early weight plateau. So lack of adherence means that you're not sticking to the diet, and that's the reason that your weight plateaus. You might stick to it most of the time, but those times you don't stick to it, like on the weekends, matter. If you're consuming a significant amount of calories, you can wipe out everything you've done during the week. And that's often what happens, especially if the diets that people are following are too restrictive, then they feel like they need to overindulge. Your metabolic rate does go down as you lose weight. A 200-pound body burns more calories than a body that's 150. Naturally, as you're losing weight, your maintenance level of calories actually goes down. That means that in order to get into a calorie deficit, you'll need to bring those calories down, or you're going to need to increase your calorie expenditure. When you diet, you send a signal to your body that calories are scarce. So it will drop down a little bit, but most of these changes, these metabolic adaptations, are short term. So as you're dieting, you'll see some reduction in your metabolic rate, and your body eventually adapts to that as well. So it's not like you just bring your metabolic rate down so low that it's impossible for you to lose weight. There will always be a point that you can lose weight. And if for some reason you're not, you do need to see your doctor, because there may be something else going on, like a thyroid condition. Another myth is that calorie deficits need to be huge. I usually recommend a calorie deficit of about 250 to 300 calories per day for someone who's already exercising and fairly active, like my clients are. If you're completely sedentary, it's a good idea to add exercise, and you might be able to get into a calorie deficit with even less than that. Extreme calorie deficits can affect your relationship with food, as we saw with the semi-starvation study. The psychological side is often overlooked, but it's probably the biggest part of being consistent with your fat loss. And if you're only consuming 1,000 calories a day, you're not gonna get the vitamins, the minerals, and phytonutrients that are gonna benefit your health. You need enough fat for your hormonal health. You need enough fiber for your digestion and protein for muscle repair and growth. And if you're not getting all that, you may feel tired, you might not sleep as well, then you're going to be moving around less, you're probably not going to be able to exercise, exercise. It has been shown that people who are on a calorie-restricted diet for a longer period of time will naturally reduce their NEAT, their non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so they're not moving around as much as they used to, and that means that they're expending fewer calories. You might not even notice that. Sometimes people use trackers so that they know that they're moving around actively throughout the day, and that's a good thing to do if you are dieting and starting to feel like maybe you are tired and you end up sitting a lot more, because that's going to affect your calorie expenditure and make it harder for you to get in a calorie deficit or stay in a deficit. You should be in a calorie deficit forever. Here's the tricky thing here. We don't want to be dieting all the time in terms of constantly lowering our calories, but at some point you need to eat the right amount of calories to maintain the state that you're at. And I talked about this a little bit, but your body does constantly make adjustments based on your body size, how much muscle you have compared to fat, and also what you're taking in. If you're eating more calories, then your body expends more calories to digest. So there are constant adjustments being made. Continuous low calorie eating is very hard, and it's not really what you want to be doing for the long term. You're going to see some of that metabolic adaptation, which you can overcome by taking diet breaks, which means that you're increasing your calorie intake strategically, not just starting to eat whatever you want, whenever you want to, but choosing a number that's higher, maybe an extra 250, 300 calories. So you have to get into a calorie deficit to keep losing fat, but I'm certainly not recommending just keep going lower and lower. You have to look at other things as well, how much weight training you're doing in order to maintain your muscle mass, and how much protein and how much fiber you have in your diet, so that you're giving your body all those benefits, because your body has adjusted to that lower calorie intake, and if you overeat considerably, then you're going to put on fat rather quickly. So doing it gradually means that your body has time to adjust for the increased calorie intake. For tips on getting into a calorie deficit without counting calories, watch this video here.